Cheryl Davis has been in the real estate industry for over 35 years and is a second-generation realtor. She is currently a broker with Cross Streets Realty Incorporated. For the past 12 years, Cheryl has worked as a real estate instructor and was previously the Director of Education for Florida Realtors. She currently co-owns Cross Streets Academy. Cheryl also works as a disability consultant, helping people with disabilities and seniors retrofit their homes to make them accessible. She also serves as a disability advocate with several national organizations. Let's give another round of applause to Cheryl Davis.
Thank you, everybody. It's great to be with you today. I'm going to make some of you a little bit jealous. I am here from sunny Florida, where it's supposed to be about 80 degrees today. So I know I heard that you all were a little chilly. I am a second-generation realtor. One of the reasons I got so interested in disabilities is I have been wheelchair bound for 24 years. And what I found was when I ended up in the wheelchair, I couldn't get into 90% of the homes. So that basically ended my selling career in real estate. So I had to look for other avenues to use my experience, and teaching just actually became very natural for me. So I've done all sorts of teaching, from pre and post licensing to CE, just about anything. But I have gotten, my passion is the American with Disabilities Act. I actually have a doctorate in industrial and organizational psychology, and my specialty is disability and employment. So hopefully I can share some new things with you today on how the American with Disability Act affects real estate agents and what brokers need to make sure they're looking for when they set up their brokerages to make sure that they are in compliance with ADA. You're going to get enough fair housing later on, but we do cover disabilities and fair housing, and we're not going to spend a lot of time with that today. You're going to get enough of that after me. This first thing, I want you to, most people don't realize the numbers that we're talking about when we talk about people with disabilities. Right now, about 19% of the American population has some sort of physical disability. About 31% have problems climbing, walking stairs, or wheelchair bound. 7.6 million experience some sort of hearing loss. 2 million are blind and unable to see, and 1.8 million have difficulty seeing. Now, one thing that can be a little bit misconstruing about these numbers is that when we talk about people with disabilities, we also tend to add senior citizens in, and they may not be counted directly into these numbers because sometimes they're just seen as you get older, you have problems seeing. So sometimes these numbers can be a little bit misleading. But one of the important things to remember is that not all disabilities are visible. Okay, I'm having technical problems here. Why is this? It works during practice. Aha. Not all disabilities are visible to people, because we do have a mental illness, intellectual disabilities like learning disorders, ADHD, things like that, and developmental disabilities, which would be things like somebody on the autism spectrum, autism, Asperger's, anything along those lines. So just because somebody may say they have a disability, but they walk perfectly fine, everything seems perfectly normal, that does not mean they don't have a disability. So we just kind of have to take people at their words for it. One of the last things you ever want to do is ask somebody, well, what's your disability? Why are you considered disabled? Of course, that would not be nice. None of us would like that. When we're looking at this, here, sorry, about 20% of the American population, or 1 out of 5 adults in the United States, suffer from some sort of mental illness. whether it's depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, something along that lines. 10.8% suffer from intellectual disabilities. The main thing we may see with this is learning disorders, ADHD, communication disorders. And then 24% of the US population has some sort of disability, whether it's physical, mental, intellectual, or development. And this number is on the rise because of the fact that 10,000 baby boomers every day are beginning to retire and go on Medicare and Medicaid. And as they get older, they're going to start having problems with housing issues, being able to get around their houses. Because most people, when they build a house, they don't think about what happens if you end up in a wheelchair or if you end up with bad knees. And they build it for what they want at that moment in time and don't think about it in the long run. It is projected by 2034 that over 1/3 of the US population will have some sort of disability. And only 1% of our housing market can meet the requirements of those people with disabilities. And if you can do the quick math there, it doesn't quite add up. So we'll talk about some things with that. So everything we're going to talk about today is going to be based on the American with Disabilities Act. This was put into effect in 1990, and it prohibited discrimination on the basis of disability in employment, all levels of government, public accommodations, facilities, transportation, and telecommunications. But there were some flaws with the American Disabilities Act. One, it didn't give us clear definitions on what is a disability, what is a reasonable accommodation. And it gave guidelines as to bathrooms, parking, stuff like that, but no specifics on how it was going to be set up. And when we look at a brokerage and some of the things you need to think about with a brokerage, we'll see some of the common mistakes of the way that the ADA has been interpreted versus what is really functional for somebody with a disability. So the other problem with the ADA when it went into effect is Congress passed the law with a certain spirit in mind to make public more accessible to people so that they could get out and be functioning parts of the public or functioning members of society. And the legal system did not uphold the American with Disabilities Act the way that it was meant to be upheld to the spirit. They oftentimes found against the person with a disability and for the person, whether it be a business or bus or plane, whatever. They found for them rather than for the person with disability because the law was so broadly written. So in 2009, they came out with the American with Disabilities Amendment Act. And one of the things that this did is it finally gave us what a formal definition of what exactly a disability is and what a reasonable accommodations are. And we'll look at those two terms here in just a minute. It gave the court stronger standing in terms of supporting people with disabilities because now we have a definition of what a disability is. Let me give you an example. My mother has a friend who has a daughter that she would have 7 grand mal seizures a day. And under the American with Disabilities Act, she was not considered disabled. Well, there's no way she can go out and work and perform normal in society like that. Now, under the definition given in the ADAA, we do now have a definition that she is considered disabled. The same with people with severe diabetes and any number of illnesses. And one of the things that this did is it actually allowed the Supreme Court to overrule some major decisions that they had made with the ADA law. So we definitely got a better situation now, but it's not perfect yet. One of the things I wish it would have done is we still have these broad strokes on what is accessible. Accessible is a misnomer because what's accessible to me may not be accessible to somebody else. It's going to be different. Everybody's disability is different. So everybody's ability to do anything is different. So accessibility is really a misnomer. So we're going to look at 3 definitions here. And the first one is a disability. And I'm going to read this because I just think it's important that you get the actual verbiage out of the law. And it says a person with a disability is a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life function. And this includes people who have a record of such an impairment, even if they are not currently having the problems. It includes individuals that have a disability, but are regarded as don't have a disability, but are regarded as having a disability. And ADA also makes it unlawful to discriminate against a person based on that person's association with someone with a disability. So we went from really no definition to a very, very broad definition of disability. One of the things that I think is interesting is under the ADAA, if you are a drug addict or an alcoholic, you are not considered disabled. But if you are a recovering drug addict or a recovering alcoholic, you are considered disabled. So there's some interesting little nuances there. When it talks about major life activities, what we're talking about is daily activities, and it's going to include things such as caring for yourself, performing manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, learning, breathing, anything that we all take for granted. If you can't do it because of what's wrong with you, then that would be a major life activity, and if you could then qualify for disability. The other one that is kind of a misnomer, and there's been a lot of problems with, is reasonable accommodation. And we got the definition now that this is an adjustment made to a system to accommodate or make fair the same system from an individual based on a proven need. And those needs can vary from individual to individual. Recently, there was a lawsuit in which a local board of realtors was sued by a young lady that was deaf. She wanted to attend a class, and she requested a reasonable accommodation of having a sign interpreter provided for her during the class by the board. The board decided that that was going to be too expensive and they weren't going to do it. But what they did do is they moved her seat in the classroom to put her closer to the screen and closer to the speaker so she could read lips. And they put on the closed captioning on the Zoom presentation. She felt that this wasn't enough. They didn't meet her reasonable accommodation, so she sued them. And the judge ruled that yes, they did make reasonable accommodations, that it wasn't what she requested, but what they did worked. So they were actually found innocent in this case. So just because somebody requests a huge accommodation does not mean it's always necessarily the one that you have to give. You need to look at the price. Is it going to disrupt other people? There's a lot of things that go into making or, fulfilling a reasonable accommodation. And it does have to be reasonable. Okay. So, and when we talk about major life activities, these are different body functions such as your brain, immune system, respiratory, neurological, digestive, and circulatory functions. Okay, so we've got our definition now. There's one more definition that I want you to be aware of, and that is universal design. Universal design was created by an architect known as Ronald Mace. And basically, it's a barrier-free concept in architecture or building homes or businesses. The idea is that a very wide variety of people can use it. And one of the nice things about universal design, if you're not familiar with it, it gives you specifics that, you know, light switches should be 48 inches off the floor. Electrical outlets should be 14 inches off the floor. There's some very specific things in there. Universal design, again, I stated this earlier, that only 1% of American homes meet at least 5 out of the 7 principles of universal designs. This is going to be another major issue in the next 10 years in real estate, is finding homes for people that have mobility issues is going to be difficult. And let me tell you, it is much cheaper to build a home using universal design than it is to retrofit a home. I did a project with the University of Florida, and we had several different groups from UF come in, and we designed a home that was a normal home, like, you know, any of you would build. We then took that home and made it universal design, and we priced it out both ways. There was $1,000 difference in building it from regular to where it's accessible for life for somebody. To me, that is just, when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, that is just, it's a not, you know, you get a little bit cheaper refrigerator. So, but we also took that home and retrofitted it. The retrofit was $95,000. So $1,000, $95,000. The numbers are astronomical and pretty scary, actually. Here are the 7 requirements for universal design. It has to have equitable use, meaning that anybody can use it. It has to have flexible uses. It has to be simple and intuitive. One of the things we're seeing here nowadays are smart homes are becoming very popular. It has to have tolerance for error, so that if there is an error, there's got to be a way to get around it, or that you can work with it. It has to extend low physical effort to do something. That's so if your light switch is at 48 inches, it's going to be about shoulder height for most people. And you want the flip panel light switches as opposed to the toggle switches. And that is going to make it easier for anybody even if they have problems with their hand or something, if they have a deformity, they can get those lights on and off. And then also the size and space for the approach and use, regardless of body size, posture, mobility, anything. The 3 common things that they really want to see in a home that would be considered universal design would be a home with no steps. At least one entrance has no steps. You have a 36-inch door, and you have at least half a bath on the first floor. Those are the 3 major things that you'd want to see in a home to be considered accessible. And people are like, well, you know, I don't want to, accessible stuff doesn't look nice. Well, that's not necessarily true, especially nowadays. We're getting more and more put in as far as equipment, bars, stuff like that. They're being created more decoratively along with being functional. So we'll look at some pictures with that in a few minutes. My computer. Sorry about that. For some reason, when your poll came up, it kicked me out. So let's look at real estate brokerages. And there's several areas that are the main topics when we talk about problems with things that you need to look at with a real estate brokerage. That's parking, ramps, meeting areas, doors, and bathrooms. Now, with parking, ADA says that for every 25 spaces, you should have one handicap accessible space. And that should be at least 8 inches wide, 11 for a van, it's going to be a van. And then you should have an aisle. Um, 5-inch wide feet that serves for cars and vans and has area for people to load and unload. The most common thing that you see with this is that if you look at this picture where the gentleman is unloading, he has to back the van in because most of the time they put the 5 feet on the driver's side of the car. However, in most states, it is illegal to unload a wheelchair on the driver's side of the car. It has to be in the back or on the passenger side. So most of the time, if you have a van, you're gonna have to back in to use it, which is great if you have one of those rear end cameras. Unfortunately, my van does not, and I'm not exactly the best at backing. So I have to look for other alternatives. One of the best things you can do is in this case, you would want both areas, both parking spots, including between the 2 cars, to be handicapped. That way one is on the driver's side and one is on the passenger side. The one on the passenger side, you'd want to put a sign up for van accessible. People should look, and if it says van and there's another open one that's a regular handicap spot and they can get out and walk normally, I would like to think that that would be the spot they take. That is not always the case. One of the things, I've been in a 4-year fight with my condo association trying to get a handicapped parking spot that I can get out of safely. And you wouldn't think that in this day and age that would be an issue, but it still is. So when you're laying out your handicap spots or your parking lot, if you're building a new place, think about this and keep this in mind, that you need to have that 5-foot aisle on the passenger side of the car to make sure that it is van accessible. The next one is ramps. Most of us do have some sort of, unless we have an interior office, of steps or curbs that are going to have to go, people are going to have to go up. If that's the case, you're going to need to put in a ramp. Under ADA, the rule is for every inch rise, you need to have a 12-inch incline. And it should be a 1:48 maximum distance between the 2 areas. If you have 12 feet of incline and you still have more to go, you need to have a 5-foot balanced area before you start the incline again. So that it's easier for a person to get up, turn, and then come back up again, and it doesn't get to be too stiff. My idea of enjoyment is I like it when people have the really long ramps, because I can get in my manual chair and just let myself go, and just, it's like skiing in a wheelchair. But not everybody likes that. People tend to have a heart attack. The other thing is people think ramps have to be ugly. They don't. This is a ramp that a builder friend of mine built. And it's ramp going onto the deck. And, I think it's gorgeous. And as we talk about this stuff, again, most people don't like the idea of ADA because of the fact they think it has to be ugly. And it doesn't. We're going to see some pictures throughout this that are actually very nice looking instances. And some of them you wouldn't even think would be accessible. That wouldn't be your first thought if you looked at that piece of property. The next one is bathrooms. You want to make sure what the law says is that you have to have a 5-foot turning radius in a bathroom. Well, the problem with that is most people build a 5-by-5 bathroom, and then they put a toilet and a sink and a garbage can and all of that in there. And now you don't have a 5-by-5 turning radius, and somebody in a wheelchair has problems negotiating in that bathroom. So that 5-by-5, you need to make sure that that is a clear turning radius. And you can see in the second picture here that you have the 5-by-5, even though where the toilet is and the sink are, it's a little bit smaller, you still have room enough that you can maneuver. But that is a big thing. And one of the huge things that I see is when I go places is not having a bathroom with the turning radius. Another thing that you need to think about with bathrooms, it shows here a minimum of a 32-inch door. That's great, but there are going to be a lot of people that cannot get through a 32-inch door in a wheelchair, or even some walkers. You really want a 36-inch door on here. The office building that I'm in is a 10-story office building, and it was built in 1959, long before the American with Disabilities Act. And it has 32-inch doors on the bathroom. In 1990, they went through and they made one of the stalls accessible, which is great, but I can't get into the bathroom without help or without destroying the bathroom door. And if you saw the bathroom door, you'd know what I talk about. It is just so dinged and cracked and everything from where I've hit it over the years. It is on the agenda to fix it, but when they do it, they want to do it right, and it's going to cost about $30,000 to do a male and female bathroom. So it is something that's been put off. So again, if you can, anything you can do from construction rather than retrofitting is going to be much, much cheaper. The other one is you want to make sure that you have reinforced walls so that you can put grab bars up and you know the grab bars are going to stay. The last thing you want is for somebody to grab a grab bar and it comes out of the wall. And if you don't have a reinforced wall, that's what's going to happen. So oftentimes, if you're retrofitting an office or a home, you're having to actually pull part of the wall out, reinforce it, and then put it back again to make sure that you have these. And this area where it's where the line shading is where you should put grab bars. Next to the toilet, between the toilet and the sink, this is one that a lot of people don't think of. Ideally, you want bars so that somebody with a handicap can help push themselves off of the toilet. So that's what the bar between the toilet and the sink is that gives the bar on each side. And the nice thing about bars like that one in this picture is that they go up. So if they can be put up out of the way, and then somebody, if they need it, they just bring it down. One of the problems in this particular bathroom, if this was a public bathroom, is some people get on the toilet using what's known as a slide board. They put a board underneath the wheelchair onto the toilet, and they use the bars to pull themselves onto the toilet. And this configuration that's in this particular one could be difficult for somebody to do that. So again, you need to think about, this is where universal design comes in. Let's set that toilet off by itself a little bit so that if somebody needs to pull themselves onto the toilet, they have room to get their wheelchair there and to do that. Because again, you want it's functional for as many people as possible. Bathroom safety. This is more for homes and offices. A lot of us don't have showers in our offices, but if you do want a curbless or no step roll-in shower. There should be support bars. And I like this picture here because it has bars all the way around it. So no matter what your disability or how you have to move, you would be able to grab onto something. You want adjustable height shower heads and a fixed shower seat. Now, they do have what's known as a transfer bench, and these can be used in homes with tubs, and you transfer onto the bench, and then you put your legs into the tub, and you can use the handle or bars on the far side of the shower wall to pull yourself into the shower. You want level handles. Again, you really don't want the turn handles, because if somebody doesn't have good manual dexterity, they're not going to be able to handle it. And you want non-slip tile. This is something that most people don't think about, and I think is really interesting. And I put this in here for specific reasons. That is the tilt mirror. If you have a regular mirror on the wall, somebody in a wheelchair may not be able to use it. A lot of times I'm looking at the top of my head. With the tilt mirror, it can be adjusted based on the person's disability, and anybody can use it. If you just a normal person walks in and stands in front of it, fine. If somebody in a wheelchair comes in, they then can fix their makeup, do their hair, and as such. And then you want the lever faucets. Again, you don't want the turning or cranking ones, because they could be difficult for a lot of people with manual dexterity issues. Visitability. This is important with real estate brokerages. We want people to be able to get into our office. So you want to have a 0-step entrance, a 36-inch wide door, and a clear space on that after that door. One of the things you see, especially in a lot of houses, is people all have a wide entranceway, so they put a table there. Well, now you've just cut down where somebody in a wheelchair can't get by that table. And of course, you want to have at least one partial bath that is wheelchair accessible on the first floor. So these are things you're going to want to think of when you're setting up your office. 36-inch wide door is probably the commonplace. That is the magic number that we want to try and get to. Because one of the things you have to look at is this wheelchair here has what the rear wheels have camera in them. They're actually tilted out. That gives the wheelchair a stronger base, and the wheelchair user can do more things with that. But if you have a wheelchair that's 30 inches and then you camera a couple of 10, 20 degrees, they're not going to be able to get through a 32-inch door. You're going to have to do the wider doors. So whenever possible, open the doorways up. If you can get away without a door, that's fantastic. Otherwise, make sure that it's at least 36 inches and that there's plenty of room as you go through. Hallways, you want 48 inches if possible. Because you want to make sure that somebody's not a tight area for them. And if they have to turn around in the hallway or get into a bedroom, they can do that. That was one of the things we had when I came home from the hospital after I ended up in a wheelchair, was that you had to go down a hallway to get into my bedroom. And the hallway was so small that I couldn't get down there and turn into the bedroom. So we ended up having to move the whole house around so that I could have a bedroom that I could actually get into. I had to take over the master bedroom. I kicked my mother out of her room. So you do want 48 inches wide. Now, ideally, the ideal door would be a pocket door, which is the picture on the right. Excuse me. But if you have a home that's already built or an office that's already built, getting that pocket door is going to be difficult. It's going to take a lot. So one of the next best things you can do is to do barn doors, which is the picture on the left. There's some sort of railing system and you have a door that goes along that rail. I picked this specific one because this is a pretty modern door. Most people think, oh, you know, it's a barn door. It's going to be wood and ugly and, you know, it's not going to fit in with my decor. You can find barn doors with frosted glass. There's some really pretty ones out there, and you can get very decorative hanging material for them. So you want to make sure that, but these two, either type of these are going to be the easiest for somebody on a walker or a wheelchair to be able to get in and out of without doing damage to the door. Because otherwise what happens is you end up having your foot plate hit the door, they get scratched up. Unfortunately, if somebody's in a wheelchair, they're going to have damage to their house. There's just no way to get around it. And so you want to set up your office so that if somebody in a wheelchair or on a walker does come in and they hit a door frame or they hit the wall, there's going to be minimal damage to it. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. Now, this is one of the areas that's becoming really important, and that is having your website being ADA compliant. I know NAR got involved. We had a big problem here in Florida that there was an attorney that went through and got all of the brokerage names in the state of Florida, and they would go to their website, and if it wasn't ADA compliant, they were sending them a letter, pay us $2,000 or we're going to sue you. Our board got involved and they were able to cancel it out, but they do recommend that you do get your website ADA compliant. And what we mean by that is it has an accessible keyboard, that it can be zoomable. So if you have somebody with low vision or vision issues, they can expand the text size and look at things, that you have a dark color contrast, and you want to be able to have speech, text to speech, you know, for your computer to do that. If you talk to your web designer, they can add this capability pretty easily. So it's definitely something you want to look into, and it can boost your SEO efforts and give you a competitive advantage, because people that may not be able to use other people's website, they can use theirs. Okay, you also want to make additions to policy manuals, and there's a couple of the specific additions that you want to make. You should have a reasonable accommodation procedure in place. And that is going to say how somebody makes a reasonable accommodation. What's the procedure? Do you have a form that needs to be filled out? Who decides if that reasonable accommodation is going to be provided? Ideally, you should have somebody in your office that is a disability coordinator, so that you know that they make the decisions and it's being done consistently across the board. Part of this reasonable accommodations is what I talked earlier about. The sign language interpreter wasn't needed for the board. However, if you get somebody that comes in who needs an interpreter, we do have to provide them if you're going to take them out and show them houses. So you should have the name and telephone numbers of several people that are sign interpreters that you can get a hold of. And that may be something that the Greater Lansing Association of Realtors has for you. I know my board, we have a list of people that speak different languages and sign that we can call if we need assistance with it. Now, in reality, most people who come in and have hearing problems are going to bring their own interpreter. But in case they don't, you need to be prepared for that and have a fallback method ready. Just like with fair housing, we have to post the picture or the poster. With ADA, If you don't have a reasonable accommodation procedure or policy in place, then that can be seen, can prove your guilt. Just like not posting the fair housing poster can be used against you if you're brought up on fair housing charges. You also want to have a policy and procedure for service animals. And we're going to talk a little bit about service animals in a few minutes. But you should have in there, can they go in people's houses? If you're showing a house, do you notify the seller and see if it's okay with them? You want something clear cut and in place. At the end of this session, I have my address and email. And if anybody wants copies, I have reasonable accommodation and service animal policies that I've written for other organizations that I'd be happy to send out and share with you. MLS and advertising. A lot of people want to say ADA accessible house. Well, what does that mean? A lot of people are afraid to post anything about the house because they're afraid of being brought up on fair housing charges. If you stick to the facts, you're not going to get in trouble with MLS and advertising. If you say no step entry or ramp entry, bathroom on the first floor, wide doors, 36-inch wide doors, stay away from ADA accessible, those types of things. Stick with the facts. And then you'll be safe when it comes to advertising and putting things in MLS. PowerPoint and Zoom. This may be a way in some cases, if you have somebody who is hard of hearing, you may want to initially meet with them through Zoom. There is a way to put closed captioning on a Zoom presentation. And that way they can sit there and they can read it. It's not the most accurate thing in the world, but it does serve its purpose. It can get the general thoughts across. And from there, you can find out, do they need a sign interpreter? Are they going to bring somebody? Or what accommodations do they need? It may just help bridge the gap with some of this. The sign interpreter, we've talked about, you should have an idea of 3 or 4 people. You can go to local deaf agencies, community colleges, the school board, and get names of sign interpreters. And those people, you would be able to hire them to come out and interpret if you had a buyer or seller that needed that interpreter. It's one of those things that if you prepare for it, it's never going to happen. But if you don't prepare for it and it happens, you can get in trouble with it. So be prepared. So disability etiquette. This is something, this is a 3-hour course in itself. So I'm going to kind of just take it down really simple. And that is, don't make decisions for the person. Okay. They are their own person. They do have their own ability to think. So, you know, you ask them and they can decide what they can and can't do. People laugh at me because it drives me crazy when people will run in front of me to open a door for me. Well, I can open doors myself. I've been doing it for a long time. They don't ask, and they'll almost get run over by my wheelchair because they cut in front of me so closely. And then if I do hit them with my wheelchair, they get really mad at me. And it's like, well, it was your fault anyways. Don't do that. Always ask, never assume anything. This is important if you're dealing with somebody with mental issues or mental health issues or intellectual issues. Don't be afraid to ask, what can I do to help you? Or is there anything I can do to help you? Or please let me know. But don't assume that they need you to do things for them. Make sure you ask, because you can, in actuality, make things harder for them rather than easier. Every person's different, so is every disability. So what happens for one person or works for one person may not work for somebody else. So this is, again, is where it's so important to ask what do you need me to do, or can I do anything to help you? If you have somebody with like anxiety issues, it may be as simple as taking them into a small conference room and closing the door so that they can feel secure. Some people can't be in closed spaces. So again, don't assume anything, always ask. And the number one thing, you always want to give the person their dignity. Don't try and take anything away from them. Let them, they're there to buy a house or to sell a house. If they're that involved in the process, they should be able to make some decisions themselves. And so you want to give them the dignity to do that. And everybody should be treated as an individual. That's a huge one. Again, don't treat them as their disability. Their disability is one small part of that person. This is Mucha. Mucha is my service dog. She's a 7-year-old golden retriever and lab. And we've been a team for about 5 years now. She came from Canine Companions for Independence, which is the largest national provider of service dogs. They provide dogs like Mucha to me for free. So there is a difference between service animals and emotional support animals. Service animals are recognized by the Department of Justice, and they are dogs that provide a service to somebody with a disability. They can be guide dogs, which help for either the hearing or the blind. Those are the only 3 types of dogs: service, guide, and hearing dogs that are recommended by or recognized by the Department of Justice. Emotional support dogs are not. However, this is where we get some problems. Is any of you that are in property management probably know this. If somebody comes in with an emotional support animal into a complex that says no animals, you have to allow them in if they can provide you with a letter from a mental health professional. Now, part of the problem has been that there are places that there are con websites that you can go to, and they will write you a letter for $75. I didn't put it in the presentation, but there is a website called petscreening.com. With petscreening.com, they keep a list of these fake websites and fake mental health professionals' names that if they're on that site, then that's not a real letter. Somebody's just paid to get that letter because they want to live in this complex with their animal. So that's an important one if you do property management, is to have that petscreening.com. With service animals, you can ask what service they provide. You can ask about their vaccinations. And you can ask, have they had professional training? That's it. You can't ask what your disability is and what they do for you, but you can ask what service they provide. Emotional support animals are not limited to just dogs. I think we've all heard the stories about snakes and pigs, and anything can be considered an emotional support animal. And then we'll talk about that. One of the things we are finally seeing, the first industry to really start standing up between service animals and emotional support animals is the airline industry. They have now stated that no emotional support animals will be allowed on planes. Service animals, you have to not only have a certificate from the Department of Transportation, but from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, that they are support animals and they meet certain health criteria, and have a list of all of their vaccinations to date. And a plane is not required to have more than 2 service animals on it. They can decide for themselves if they want to allow more or not. So they are the first ones that are finally starting to stand up to some of the abuse that we've seen with the emotional support animals. Here in Florida, it's actually a 2nd-degree misdemeanor and punishable by a $500 fine or up to 60 days in jail for saying that an animal is a service animal when it's not. So I'm hoping we will start seeing this be enforced more and more in the future. Okay, sorry about that. This is a huge subject, and it's not one that's talked about a lot. And so this is a very quick overview of it. And hopefully I provided you with some answers. My information is there on the screen. If you have something, want copies of anything, please feel free to contact me. And for the rest of the time, I'll take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Cheryl. Do we have any questions? We have some online ones. Okay.
Good morning, Cheryl. We have 2 questions online.
Okay.
How do we handle a client that is protected under the ADA when it comes time to close at the title company? Can we share info about the client to title to ensure they can accommodate reasonable requests? Remote options sometimes cost the client more money.
The best thing to do with that is talk to your client. Again, ask them, this is what's going to happen at closing. Do we need to get with the title company and make any accommodations for you? And it may be accommodations like they go in the day before closing to read all the documents. It can be something really easy, or it could be more complex, but that's where it's important to ask them, what do you need?
Here's another one online. Animals used for diabetes, for instance, detecting sugar, is not mental health. So just get another letter from another type of clinician.
No, they would be considered a service animal. And with the service animal, all you have to say is they're a service animal. And they can ask you what service does this animal provide you. Mucha is actually an epilepsy dog. She tells me before I have a seizure. She also opens doors for me, opens cabinets and drawers for me. So I can tell people all the stuff she can do. And then that is satisfactory. You don't have to get a letter from a doctor. Only with the mental health, the emotional support animals, do they require it. They don't legally, a service animal doesn't have to have a vest on, but you should have, if you've gotten it from a legitimate organization, there are vests for them to wear. Unfortunately, you can also buy them very cheaply on Amazon.
And then we have one more question online. Does a business have to change if it was built in the early 1900s?
No. That's one of the areas that reasonable accommodations it covers, is that if it's going to be too expensive, or if you're in a historical home or something and it's going to change the nature of that home, you do not have to make those accommodations. You probably would at least want to try to have a ramp someplace, or do basic things that aren't going to mess up the structure. Even if it's something as simple as having a policy in place that if somebody can't get into your office, this is where we're going to meet. Maybe working with another realtor to have an office that you could meet at or something. You do not have to adjust the building. They have seen that as being not part of reasonable accommodation.
We have another question, Cheryl.
Okay.
Hi, Cheryl. Thank you for all the great information today. I just wanted to comment to all the realtors out there who may be working with people in new construction that when I went through a development process with a local nonprofit organization a couple of years ago, and several of the funding sources had certain requirements, and although we only had to have 10% of the units that were fully ADA compliant, it required 100% of the units to be visitable, was the term that they used, and it was essentially incorporating all of the universal design into those units, and it really was no additional cost for the visitability. And I will say I didn't think about this type of demand that there would be for people who did not have any physical mobility limitations, but for people who had loved ones, friends, family, that they wanted to be able to come in, to be able to visit them. And it was truly amazing to me that before we even had a for lease sign up, the word had gotten out. We had 21 total units and 91 applications before we even had a for lease sign up. And so for anybody working with new construction and, talking to the builder, incorporating a lot of these designs for the marketability, we when realtors are involved, a lot of times we talk about, marketability, when they go to sell the home, having those sort of things incorporated in can make that marketability for resale just huge. So one thing to just keep in mind, I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, and one of the problems, again, this is where the ADA fell short. It does say 10% of new developments have to be accessible, but it doesn't give guidelines on what that accessibility is. I'm actually working with several members of the US Senate right now that we're trying to put a bill in that 20% of all new development must have at least one entry that was 0 steps, have a 36-inch door, and have at least an accessible bathroom, half bath on the first floor. I'm hopefully going to make that law at some point in the future because it is, and we see 34% of the population. Plus, I always ask people this: have any of you ever moved a refrigerator before? Wouldn't it be nice not to have to go up a step or to have a door wide enough that you can get the refrigerator through? Just for moving purposes, having that kind of accessibility, not even from somebody visibility or accessibility, that's just common, that it would help anybody moving in or out of a home. And it's something that needs to be thought of more because we are heading towards another housing crisis and that houses are not accessible.
Are there any other questions? All right, Cheryl, thank you very much for sharing your time and expertise with us today, and have a great day.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break and head right back here, and we'll be moving on to our next speaker. Thank you.
The Finance Committee is tasked with monitoring and evaluating the association's financial position. When the National Association of Realtors special assessment was going to increase dues, the board took action, absorbing that cost and not passing it on to members. The annual office fee for brokerages was also removed. Greater Lansing Association of Realtors and Multiple Listing Service dues and fees have not increased in over a decade. In an effort to strive for high industry standards, the Multiple Listing Service Committee focused on data accuracy by establishing rules on photograph and public remark minimums to ensure proper representation and reevaluated non-list sale criteria. The committee also enforced the National Clear Cooperation Policy, which states all listings must be in the MLS within 1 day of marketing a property. In order to provide a better user experience, a recommendation was made to use Central Lock as the association key system. This group of members upheld the Code of Ethics by reviewing complaints and recommending cases for ethics or arbitration hearings. A group of local peers with more than 5 years of real estate experience heard cases of potential ethics and/or arbitration violations and determined rulings. This committee instituted regular broker roundtables, which provided brokers and signatories with a platform to communicate and problem solve. The Leadership Development Committee researched and nominated fellow members to continue leading the association into the future. 2022, members continued to receive a world-class education. Evaluating top trends and meeting our members' ever-changing needs is vital to this industry. Topics included taxes and IRS, legal updates, digital risk management, probates, estates and trusts, fair housing law, home warranty, and inspections. Local Realtors participated in the National Association of Realtors Realtor Volunteer Days, impacting 3 Michigan organizations. In addition, past projects were revisited and maintained. Protecting private property rights and supporting the Realtor Party is a pillar of the association. The Realtor voice was heard in local elections and helped draft an ordinance that would have restricted landlords in Lansing. Fair housing and inclusion continues to be a priority through action, like supporting a bill removing restrictive covenants and working on fair housing resolutions with Lansing and East Lansing. The association was honored at the state and national levels for RPAC achievements, including the Triple Crown Award. RPAC had an investment of $80,279 with a participation level of 75.6%. And more than $9,000 was invested from the annual RPAC golf outing.
Alexia Smokler is the Director of Fair Housing Policy and Programs at the National Association of Realtors. Based in Washington, D.C., she communicates NAR's support for fair housing and closing homeownership gaps to Congress and federal agencies. Alexia also leads NAR's ACT initiative, which emphasizes accountability, culture change, and training to advance fair housing in the industry. Before joining NAR, Alexia worked in fair housing enforcement at HUD and on the staff of Congressman John Conyers Jr. and with nonprofit civil rights organizations. Good morning, Ms. Smokler, and thank you for being here.
Good morning, Lansing. It's so great to be speaking with my home state of Michigan today. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Alexia Smokler. I lead fair housing initiatives at NAR. At NAR, we want the benefits of home ownership to be available to the broadest possible group of buyers. Not only is that good for business, it's good for communities, it's good for families, and it's good for the economy. But we acknowledge that not all Americans have been able to access home ownership on equal terms. The racial homeownership gap in America, a chasm of 30 points between Black and white Americans, it's virtually the same today as it was in the 1950s before passage of the Federal Fair Housing Act. And it's getting bigger. So just last week, NAR released its 2023 snapshot of race and home buying in America. And we found that while the US homeownership rate has increased steadily over the last decade, the Black homeownership rate has not kept pace with that of other groups. The good news is that the Asian American homeownership rate is at an all-time high. And the Hispanic homeownership rate is now over 50%. but the Black American homeownership rate barely budged over the last decade. And the Black-white homeownership gap is now larger than it was 10 years ago. Why is this gap so stubborn? In order to understand what's behind it, we've got to learn a little bit of history. And what I'm going to show you is that this gap and our segregated communities, they're not just the natural consequences of people's individual choices. Throughout the first 2/3 of the 20th century, government at all levels, the housing industry, financial institutions, and private citizens worked together to limit where people would be allowed to live based on their race or their national origin. In the white neighborhoods, government programs and financial institutions supported homeownership with loans and other investments. Black neighborhoods, Black Americans were denied those opportunities. And even where Black Americans were able to become homeowners, to build businesses, to build wealth, in spite of all those obstacles, in many cases, those homes, those businesses, that wealth was destroyed. The consequences of those historic actions have resonated down through generations. We still live with them today. So the 1968 Act made housing discrimination illegal, but it didn't provide any remedy for those generations of lost opportunity that preceded it. Let's talk about a few of the ways that public policy and industry practice denied homeownership and wealth building opportunities for people of color. Let's start with racial zoning. This became a widespread practice in the 1910s and 20s during the Great Migration of Black Americans out of the rural South into southern cities and into the North. As this massive population shift occurred, many cities passed zoning ordinances limiting where occupants could live based on their race. You see here a flyer associated with a campaign for a racial zoning ordinance in St. Louis in 1916. It warns white residents that their block will be, quote, ruined by Negro invasion, and that in order to, quote, save their homes, they should vote for segregation. Now, the Supreme Court struck down racial zoning as unconstitutional in 1917. But cities found other ways to put laws on the books that would limit where people could live according to their race, and to ensure that neighborhoods wouldn't integrate. In many cities, segregation was tied to wider community planning goals. Cities would do things like rezoning the Black streets and neighborhoods for business or industrial use, creating environmental and health hazards and lowering property values. While white neighborhoods were zoned to encourage development of single-family homes with yards and to prevent the construction of duplexes, apartments, or townhomes. In the 1930s, the early appraisal and real estate industries had adopted this idea without any evidence that the mere presence of Black people in a neighborhood decreased property values. Not policy, but people. It was the people with their deficient character who made the property values go down. That was the theory. And we put that theory into effect by adopting policies that excluded Black people from homeownership to protect white property values. Let's take a look at the 1924 Realtor Code of Ethics. In 1924, our code said it is unethical to sell a home to a person of color in a white neighborhood because that person's presence will decrease property values. That was our official policy through the 1950s. And members in many cities believed that they would face sanctions if they sold homes to Black buyers in white neighborhoods. Another method the real estate industry used to limit home ownership for Black people and certain immigrants and religions was the racially restrictive covenant. These covenants limited who a property owner could sell that property to based on the buyer's race, national origin, or religion. We inserted these covenants into millions of deeds across America, and if a property owner tried to sell to a person of color in violation of that covenant, real estate groups would sue. We sued both sellers and buyers. If a white person whose deed contained a covenant tried to sell their home to a Black person, person of Asian descent, or others. These covenants successfully shut African Americans and others out of neighborhoods for decades, until the Supreme Court finally struck them down in 1948, though they continued to be used for at least another 10 years. This notion put forward by our industry that race impacts property values was baked into federal programs designed to boost home ownership for white people only. During the Great Depression, when foreclosures began to skyrocket, the federal government stepped in. It bought 1 million defaulted mortgages and changed them to fixed rate long-term loans. Those type of loans had never been seen before, the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. To further boost home ownership, the Federal Housing Administration was established in 1934 with great support and encouragement from the real estate industry. The FHA would insure private loans if banks provided these sustainable long-term mortgages. Now, the FHA's appraisal standards, and you see here their 1938 underwriting manual, required that mortgages would only be insured if the home was covered by a racial covenant, located in a homogeneous white neighborhood, and removed from, quote, blighting influences, which was code for people of color. In its mortgage insurance program, the FHA incorporated risk maps that rated neighborhoods as, quote, hazardous for investment if any Black people or certain immigrants lived there. These residential security maps, as they were called, had been made for hundreds of cities across the United States, including Lansing. And I have the Lansing, East Lansing redlining map up here on the screen. Neighborhoods deemed hazardous were colored red on the maps. And that's where the term redlining comes from. The effect of this policy was that from the 1930s until almost 1970, 98% of FHA loans went to white borrowers and white neighborhoods. So the federal government subsidized home ownership for white people, while withholding that same aid from African Americans and certain immigrants. Again, after World War II, the federal government, financial institutions, and the real estate industry boosted home ownership for white people while shutting Black Americans out of those opportunities. The government ensured the financing for developers to build the suburbs. And you see here a famous one in Levittown, New York. And paid for the highways to get to these new suburban developments so that the returning GIs and their new families could buy affordable new homes. These homes were cheap. They were subsidized. The GIs' mortgages were also backed by the federal government. That time after World War II was the time when America transitioned from a land that was majority renters to majority homeowners, thanks to those federal policies boosting homeownership. But these new developments all had racially restrictive covenants written into their deeds. It was required as a condition of the federal financing so that a Black veteran who had served his country couldn't move in. From the 1930s to the 1950s, the FHA insured loans on nearly a third of all new housing construction, nearly all in the suburbs, and nearly all for white people only. Only a handful of the 1 million Black World War II veterans received assistance to buy a home under the GI Bill. In many cases, the Black veteran had to go back to the segregated neighborhood because those neighborhoods were the only places Black people were allowed to live in many cities. They were often severely overcrowded. Few banks would make loans, so they had little access to capital. Cities often didn't pave the roads or sidewalks, install streetlights, or have regular trash collection. Lawyers, doctors, and businessmen might live next door to laborers, cab drivers, and bootleggers. Now, these communities were often tight-knit, where folks looked out for each other's children and shared what they had with their neighbors. And even despite discrimination in every facet of American life, some residents had become homeowners or ran thriving businesses. But from the 1950s through the 1970s, the Federal Urban Renewal Program provided funding for cities across America to flatten Black neighborhoods in the name of, quote, slum clearance. The program at the time was seen as a win-win by both developers and social reformers. The idea was to clear substandard housing and replace it with modern, clean communities. Local governments used federal funds and eminent domain to take Black homeowners and business owners' property, typically paying them a pittance in reimbursement. Federal subsidies went to urban renewal programs in more than 400 localities, displaced about 1.2 million Americans. About 600,000 housing units were destroyed, and only a fraction of those were replaced by housing that the average person could afford. While Black Americans were just 13% of the total population in 1960, they were about 55% of those displaced. Much of the land where Black people had once lived was seized by private developers. Some remained vacant and was never redeveloped. Black leaders at the time had taken to calling urban renewal Negro removal. Urban renewal swept across America until the federal government ended the program in 1974, leaving a legacy of displaced communities and unfinished projects. In cities across America, construction of the interstate highway system had a similar impact. Often as these highways were being built, planners would go out of their way to preserve white neighborhoods and landmarks while bulldozing entire Black neighborhoods and thriving business districts. Nationwide, the construction of the federal interstate highway system destroyed about 300,000 housing units and displaced over 1 million people who were disproportionately Black. Now, while the federal government was subsidizing the destruction of Black communities, remember those white GIs who had returned from World War II were able to buy cheap new homes in the new suburban developments, also subsidized by the federal government. Those white GIs saw their home value appreciate quickly. My grandpa David came back from the European theater to Grand Blanc, Michigan, and bought one. He could build equity and pass that wealth down through my family. My family could help pay for my college education. Other families couldn't do that. I've only scratched the surface of this history. There's so much more to tell. But let's move on to talk about what all this history means for Black Americans who want to buy homes today. And let me remind you, in the words of William Faulkner, one of my favorite quotes, the past is never dead. It isn't even past. Being historically locked out of homeownership and having so much wealth destroyed means that families today have fewer resources to draw upon when they are pursuing homeownership. So according to our 2023 snapshot data that I mentioned just a moment ago, and you can get it on our website, it means that white families today are more than twice as likely as Black families to be able to rely on the sale of an existing home for a down payment. Our research shows that Black households are 3 times more likely to have to tap a 401k or a pension fund to come up with down payment funds. My family helped pay for my college. Black households are more than twice as likely as white households to have student loan debt, and they have more. These high home prices that we've been seeing lately have hit Black buyers the hardest. Now, at NAR, we believe that in order to create a thriving, expanding housing market, we have to acknowledge these barriers and look for solutions. This history, it's ugly, it's painful, but we choose not to look away. We are dedicated to ensuring that we must never repeat the past and that we do what we can to repair the harm. How do we do that? Well, first, we have to make sure that we aren't making the problem any worse. First, do no harm. And unfortunately, discrimination in real estate is not just an artifact of history. It continues today. Some of you may remember that back in 2019, a newspaper in Long Island, New York called Newsday published a hidden camera investigation about alleged discrimination by real estate agents. And it rocked us. For those of you who aren't familiar, let me give you a quick recap of what Newsday was all about. Long Island, home to some 3 million people east of New York City, is very diverse, but it is also one of the most segregated areas in the country. People who worked at Newsday had heard anecdotally, and I believe some of their Black reporters and employees had actually experienced, that real estate agents were contributing to the problem. And so they launched this 3-year testing study together with the top fair housing testing group in the country to look at how the top 10 brokerages on Long Island were treating clients of different backgrounds. You may be familiar with discrimination testing. It's kind of like secret shoppers. There are two testers posing as clients. They both have the same qualifications. They're even dressed the same. In fact, in many cases, the tester, who is a person of color, might have slightly better qualifications. And they are looking for the same kind of house in the same general location on the same budget. The only difference between them is their race, national origin, disability, or whatever protected category is being tested. They each go into a brokerage separately to see what kind of treatment they receive, and then that treatment is compared. If the methodology is good, and in Newsday it was airtight, courts consider testing evidence to be some of the most persuasive evidence a plaintiff in a discrimination case can bring. And what Newsday caught on hidden camera, according to the analysis from the fair housing experts, was that real estate agents treated the white tester and the tester of color differently 19% of the time when the tester was Asian American, 39% of the time against Hispanic Americans, and nearly 50% of the time against Black Americans. 40% of the time overall, Newsday found differential treatment. According to the investigation, agents showed buyers of color fewer listings. They steered them to different neighborhoods based on their race and national origin. They required some to be pre-approved and not others to see listings based on their race. And they told them different things about neighborhoods, crime, and schools. Newsday received national media attention. It was cited in congressional testimony here in Washington. And the New York legislature subpoenaed agents and brokers, passed new legislation, and has dedicated new resources to fair housing enforcement. I would encourage any of you who haven't yet watched the documentary to do so. It's really a case study in what not to do if you want to stay on the right side of fair housing law. You can search it, you can find it by searching Google for Long Island Divided. So here at NAR, the Newsday investigation dropped on us like a bombshell. These videos showed us that we needed to do better, that we needed to hold ourselves to a higher standard. Immediately after the publication of Newsday, NAR's leadership team approved a robust fair housing initiative that I now have the privilege to lead. It's called ACT. ACT is an acronym, stands for Accountability, Culture Change, and Training. It's a package of industry reforms and tools for members, brokerages, and associations shoring up our own house. Part of it is to make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable if we violate fair housing law. But also, we want to shift hearts and minds so that equal service is something that is just woven in to the way that we serve consumers and the public. And that when we say that realtors hold themselves to a high ethical standard, upholding fair housing is a core tenet there. So let's talk about the components of ACT. Accountability. NAR has created a self-testing program for brokerages who want to voluntarily test themselves for discrimination. This will allow a brokerage to uncover and address problems confidentially before a newspaper or a private fair housing group does. We just completed phase 1 of our pilot of this program. We matched a broker with an experienced testing agency to assess how her agents were complying with fair housing law. She received that confidential report and then follow-up training for any problems that were uncovered. We've had many other brokerages express interest in self-testing, and we are ramping up the program this year. We also continue here in Washington to advocate for strong federal fair housing enforcement. We believe that enforcement, including testing, is essential to ensuring a real estate market that treats all customers fairly. Also, on the accountability front, we reviewed the real estate licensure laws of all 50 states and 4 territories of the US. There is great variability among the states when it comes to fair housing education and discipline for licensees. We found that half the states don't require any fair housing training at all to get or maintain a real estate license. We hear from a lot of members, I can't discriminate, I could lose my license. But our research has shown that that is rarely the case. Our Fair Housing Licensing Reporter allows states to compare themselves to other states and to best practices to see how strong their licensure law is when it comes to fair housing training and enforcement. And states may choose to strengthen their law or its implementing regulations. Now, the next 2 prongs of ACT, culture change and training, work in tandem with each other. We're very excited about a video series and award we've launched of Realtor Fair Housing Champions who embrace fair housing as a part of their business strategy. I'd like to share one of those short videos now. And you know what? I'm going to make sure that I have turned the sound on. Oh, I didn't. Okay, good. All right. So let's take a look at Courtney James of Durham, North Carolina, who is being the change.
When I first started in real estate, other agents at my firm didn't want to show buyers property near downtown Durham because they considered it to be a dangerous place. Downtown Durham probably has the highest population of people of color. I decided to start Urban Durham because I wanted a place that felt like it was invested in the community. And one of the things that we did from the day we opened our doors is we have a policy where for every transaction that's closed, we have that agent make a donation to a local nonprofit. Marcelle Thomas joined Urban Durham a few years ago, and from the moment she walked into our office, she has been bringing us amazing projects to work on, and we love her for it.
I work with a lot of first-time homebuyers, many whom are minority. Everything from going to classes on improving their credit to going to the self-help credit union.
One of the biggest obstacles for buyers is coming up with cash for closing. We really wanted our 2021 fundraising goal to be about helping to reduce the racial home ownership gap. And we are going to partner with the National Association of Real Estate Brokers to help provide closing cost loans for Black home buyers in the Durham area. We are worse off now in terms of the Black-white racial home ownership disparity than we were 50 years ago. And a lot of that is due to the 2008 subprime loans, where Black homeowners were twice as likely as white homeowners to have a subprime loan, meaning that they were disproportionately at risk for losing their home. Once people have this asset of their home, we feel firmly that not to sell the house is the right choice in many cases. But it can be really hard to keep up their home.
And there are so many people in that position, so many people.
Marcelle introduced me to Jessica Barnes, a single mom with 2 kids who inherited her home from her father.
Her father was too ill to maintain the home anymore, and literally everything was broken.
So we essentially completely gutted the house and renovated it. We probably had bit off more than we could chew because we are not in the construction business, but the home was fabulous after. We care a lot about fair housing, and I think that that shows in our values, and it does earn us a lot of business because people care a lot about that.
Inspiring, right? We'll be announcing our 2023 Fair Housing Champions at our Fair Housing Month event on April 25th on Facebook Live. I hope you can join us. We'll be having also a panel of expert speakers talking about overcoming these obstacles that communities that have been historically discriminated against face. So we're also introducing new and innovative training opportunities for realtors. NAR has launched implicit bias training, first a video and now a classroom course called Bias Override that is ready for CE credit in your state. What is implicit bias? It's the way that our brains automatically and often without our awareness attribute stereotypes to people that we're not familiar with. We all do it. It's the way our human brains work. It's a shortcut. It helps us categorize things quickly and make sense of all the information coming at us. But it can be a problem because a lot of those shortcuts are based on stereotypes about other groups that come from media and culture. They aren't true. And so even as our conscious minds may hold fairness and equal treatment as cherished values, our unconscious minds may be causing us to treat people differently or unfairly without our even intending to. And that can lead you down the road to a fair housing violation. You're making assumptions about people based on their identity. That could lead you into steering. It could lead you into denying equal professional service. So we all need to be very careful that we aren't letting those mental shortcuts make decisions for us. Our new classroom training teaches agents tactics to interrupt that stereotypical thinking and avoid fair housing pitfalls. They'll learn about the mind science of identity. Why do our brains do this? Study about exactly how implicit bias can result in a violation and engage in interactive exercises to enhance communication skills and business relationships with clients and colleagues of all backgrounds. And then you might have heard about something we launched at the end of 2020 called Fairhaven, a fair housing simulation. Fairhaven is really a new approach to fair housing training. There isn't anything else like it out there. We decided to create it not long after Newsday was published. We saw in more than one of those hidden camera videos, agents referencing their fair housing training. They talked about what they weren't supposed to do, like steering. They named it. They said, I'm not supposed to, and then they did it anyway. Something wasn't connecting. We could see that we needed a new kind of fair housing training, something that really resonated with realtors to teach not only the substance of the law, but also why it's so important and why we must embrace it. And that's how we came up with Fairhaven. It's not your traditional lecture or quiz. There are no lists of laws or provisions to memorize. We wanted to give members a chance to practice applying fair housing principles in scenarios that feel real. And a very special feature of Fairhaven is that the learner is also put in the shoes of a client who is stopped from buying a house because of discrimination. So now I'm going to give you a little peek inside. The fictional town of Fairhaven. It's a beautiful place, modern design, gorgeous graphics. It's really a pleasure to be there until you run into all the discrimination going on. Leaders in this fictional town, learners in this fictional town, take on the role of an agent. Their goal is to sell 4 homes in 6 months. As they work against the clock to close deals, they encounter different kinds of discrimination. A seller backs out of the deal after learning the buyer is Black. That's based on a real case. A condo board won't let a buyer who uses a wheelchair build a ramp to access the lobby. You're hosting an open house with prospects of different backgrounds. Did you treat each one the same? Learners will reach decision points as they interact with clients and colleagues. Those decisions affect the outcome. If the learner's choices align with fair housing principles, she gets a sale. If they do not, she'll have an opportunity to course correct. She'll get fed more scenarios and have more opportunities to close deals until the time runs out. Along the way, learners have the opportunity to click out to view additional resources if they want to learn more. Now, sometimes in Fairhaven, we flip the script. The learner now finds herself in the shoes of a client on the receiving end of discrimination. Your agent was really nice to you on the phone, but when you come in the office and she sees the color of your skin, her demeanor changes. When an agent learns you're gay, she discourages you from moving into a particular neighborhood. Your agent keeps trying to steer you to a neighborhood where people of your national origin live, even though you've told them it's a long commute to your office. Each client point of view scenario is followed by video testimonials from real people who have experienced housing discrimination. With these powerful stories, Fairhaven aims to affect learners' emotions, to open them up to see and even feel just a little the harm that discrimination causes in real people's lives. With this training, we're asking learners to open their eyes and their hearts, challenge some of their own biases, and motivate deep reflection and ultimately behavior change. We've set the bar high with Fairhaven. It's received very positive feedback from members. I would encourage all of you, if you haven't been there yet, to take a visit. It's a free member benefit at fairhaven.realtor. Now, fair housing training, ensuring we abide by the law. As I said, that's the minimum we can do. First, do no harm. NAR continues to advocate in Washington for policy changes that can help make homeownership more affordable, accessible, and available to all consumers, like efforts to increase housing supply, to bring these prices down, promoting policies like down payment assistance, special purpose credit programs that can bring more buyers into the fold. But that'll have to be the topic for my next presentation. I've shared a lot of information with you today, and I would now be happy if we have any time to take your questions.
No questions online. Do we have any questions here in the room? Hold on, we do have one. Hold on, Alexia.
Hi, Alexia. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. What would you say to someone who's comparing gentrification that we see in urban areas across our country now, comparing that to urban renewal? Urban renewal, is that modern urban renewal?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's an interesting question. Well, I think both can result in displacement. And when we redevelop areas, you know, we need to think about how are we protecting the residents in that area so that they're not displaced. We also need to think about things like property taxes. I know some of our local associations are advocating for things like grandfathering in senior citizens' property tax levels so that it doesn't go up as the area is redeveloped. But you raise a good point, and it's good food for thought.
We have a question over here. Hold on one second, Wanda. We want to get a microphone over to her.
Good morning. We've really been enjoying this conversation. I would like to know, or I want to first say that most or a lot of your people of color get FHA loan approvals. Nowadays, with the competitiveness in the market, it is extremely difficult to get an offer accepted with an FHA loan. A lot of people, lower income people, they will not qualify for conventional mortgages. This is hurting the possibility of a low income person, a person of color, to ever get a home. What is it that we can do, or what is it that NAR can do to help alleviate this problem that we are experiencing? Thank you.
I'm really glad you asked that question. Our research team has documented this discrimination against loan types, and we have substantiated that FHA loans, VA loans, they're discriminated against in the housing market, and that has a disparate impact on people of color. FHA has actually reached out to us, and we are working together with FHA to do a myth-busting campaign, both among our members to better educate them about FHA loans. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about, what it takes to close on a deal with an FHA loan. We're also going to be doing some communication to the public around FHA loans in our consumer advertising campaign.
One more question, Alexia.
Yes, it's specifically about the accountability testing for brokerages.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that is ongoing all year, or is there a certain time that brokerages have to apply to do that? I know you mentioned that you just wrapped up your pilot program and there are plenty more interested. Just looking at what we can be telling our brokers who maybe want to do that at their own offices.
So we're scaling up this program, and it really kind of depends on the capacity of our partner, the testing organization. So this year, we're kind of in the second year of our pilot, and we're only going to be able to test 3 brokerages in the country. So it's not widely available yet, but we have not picked all 3 yet. We've only got 1 so far. So if folks are interested, they can reach out to me directly, and we can share my email address out to you, and we can see if you might be included in the pilot, or if we can put you in the queue for future years when we build out the capacity and we can test more brokers.
Any other questions? We good, Amanda? Okay, I would like to say, Alexia, to everybody here that I took the Fair Haven training late last year, and I found it to be incredibly informative, educational. It was also very interactive and entertaining, and anytime you can learn something while being entertained, it really is a very, very valuable tool. So if you have not taken it, please check it out. I did, and I found it to be very rewarding. Alexia, thank you very much for sharing your time and expertise with us this morning, and have a great day.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
That will do it for today's session. Please make sure you put down on your calendar the next industry update. Again, that will be on April 20th, 2023 at 9 a.m. here at the association with Matt DeFanis. Have a great day, everybody.